Yeah, so one of the fundamental things that Jeff was going on is the blockchain is self-proving. And so I don't know if anybody's ever purchased a car not from a dealer, right? They just found something on Craigslist and they wanted to go buy the car. What's one of the questions that comes up? Does this person actually know they own the car, or did they steal it? Are they trying to sell it to me? It's still a merchant. And so, the government has created a title system, right, to verify, so we can go look at a title and verify who owns it. Well, the title could be fake, right? And so that creates another issue. Is this a real title? And so maybe you want to go hire somebody to verify that this is a real title. So Bitcoin and its innovation with blockchain is it kind of gets rid of this untrustworthy step. Does this person own this Bitcoin? And can they transfer it to you? So you can go hire an expert, you can go hire a lawyer and verify that this person owns this. And this is something that we do as lawyers. I can write an opinion and say, yes, they own this car, yes, they own this real estate. They got it from so-and-so. They have the correct title. Or with Bitcoin, it's self-proving. So it runs its own algorithms, checks from the source who got it from, anonymously who they got it from, and can come back up to the owner and say they own it, and allow you as a buyer to know that you can make this transaction happen without worrying as much about fraud. And that's, to me, that's one of the most powerful things about it, is you can take away this issue of, do I need to trust this person, or do I go pay somebody to verify that I can trust them? Even the person you pay to verify, they might be wrong too, right? And so it removes that risk from the element of the transaction where it came.
So in the past year, there have been a couple of movements to expand the application of blockchain, and this is where everybody can begin to play a role, because there are two types of blockchains. There is the permissioned blockchain, and then there's a permissionless blockchain. So the permissionless blockchain essentially is going to be like Bitcoin. Anybody can get into it, anybody can acquire the money. A permission blockchain begins to start narrowing the requirements to get into the system. And that's where you start seeing groups, like industry groups, first it's the financial groups that have started to set up consortiums with each other to share a blockchain so that they can start interacting with each other in more efficient ways. In that sense, it's nothing. The big problem that silos and banks and everybody have had with each other is that they have their own data. They have their own data methods of keeping track of things. So the data sets can't talk to each other so easily. So if you have a shared set of data that's being trusted each time that a transaction takes place, then a group like a financial consortium can agree upon using that data. So the financial ones are the very first that are beginning to organize. But industries are starting to organize, realizing that they can do the same thing. Industries are going to start sharing a blockchain with each other. And so depending, and of course, the problem that you face is, just as lawyers see this, who's going to be the first to innovate? Who's going to be the first to adopt something new? You have stakeholders who are in an old system. They don't like change. They don't want to be the leaders in the change. And so it's a bit of a challenge as you get going to get groups to adopt. But there are some innovation groups within industries who see the chance to move this forward. In addition to industry standards, there are now groups in the legal industry, and I think this is where you're going to see a big drive forward. There are groups that are now setting up open source standards that will be recognized internationally for smart contracts. The one that we're involved with is called the Accord Project, and accordproject.org. There is one that's been around for a couple of years, and a lot of people look at it. It's called Ethereum. Now, they're not, they have a set of contract tools that you use, but they're not tying it into international standards. The Accord project is trying to tie this into ISO and other types of international standards organizations so that there'll be a set of global principles. This is how smart contracts are going to operate. And a smart contract is really nothing more than another application at the next level on the blockchain. If you have Bitcoin is nothing more than the movement of money back and forth because of an agreed upon transaction, but it's a simple contract. Well, what if you want to take a real estate transaction with, title issues, with conditions on payment, and escrows that have to take place? There's a series of logic that is involved in creating that platform, and there are tokens that could be used within that environment to move money back and forth, and those are being programmed right now. So this is literally the beginning. You're not going to find a lot of applications of this around, but you are finding, in the case of law firms, they have joined in great numbers the Accord project and Ethereum groups. There's also one called the Integra Ledger, which is based on Ethereum, and they're joining these groups and starting to program. But it's still very early stage of adoption in that setting.
So, I mean, so with smart contracts, it's essentially just a computer program that has the ability to take action without human intervention. So, one example I've read is like take Airbnb. You want to rent somebody's apartment for the weekend. How do you get them the keys? How do you get the money? How do you make sure that process is seamless? Well, you could create a smart contract for when you receive payment, the lockbox on your door unlocks the door automatically without having anybody come in and make sure that that person is the right person. Well, I guess but you kind of get the point, right? One thing happens, and so another thing automatically happens without having a human come in and verify. So another example are credit default swaps. Does anybody not know what a credit default swap is? Okay. So a credit default swap is essentially an insurance on a financial transaction. So the classic example is in the housing crisis. A lot of people invested in mortgage-backed securities, and then other banks came along and invested in defaults on the mortgage-backed securities. And so if there was a default, then another financial entity would pay another party that bought credit default swaps. So it's essentially a hedge or an investment in something failing. And so this instance, in the mortgage-backed securities instance, a lot of people foreclosed on a lot of people defaulted on their home loans, and that created a situation where a lot of people were entitled to money. And so you could have smart contracts where, without human intervention, a default happens and a payment is automatically made from somebody's bank account, a company's bank account, without having any human interaction to verify that the default happened, that this is supposed to trigger another event for a payment to be made. So, taking that big picture, you can imagine more complicated service contracts where a series of steps are supposed to take place, and that would require different intermediaries or different people to verify the steps are going on. To the extent that you can code those or program those into a system, you can eliminate the need for those intermediaries to verify the different steps and have a seamless kind of domino effect for a particular transaction or set of transactions.
Does anybody see a problem with that sort of automatic kind of thing happening? Anybody see problems with that?
You have to be very precise up front.
Very precise up front, absolutely.
It just seems like a really huge undertaking because in the case of like mortgage-backed credit swaps, you're going to have to code the underlying home loans all the way up to the swaps, which have multiple layers of counterparty. You have the loan owner or the mortgage owner, then you have the banks issuing it, and then you have the package that is management trustee, then you have selling against the investor. So you have to be able to link from all the way down to the house, home to security, things like a huge project.
So what happens if there's a mistake in the coding that takes place in the smart contract?
That's the biggest problem with Ethereum right now, which is that it's poor coding. So the
Speak up a little
default,
bit so everybody can hear.
sorry, the biggest problem with Ethereum right now, and why there's so much money being left on the table is the default option when people haven't said what happens if all else fails, where does money go? And it just goes into limbo right now. So and that's the biggest problem is it takes a lot of upfront coding and thinking about all the scenarios up front, and then at the worst case scenario, where does it go if all else fails? And then you go back to the human option. Then someone has to do it, and then you have a hard fork where you say, okay, do we have a hard fork where we have to redefine everything, or do we just have to have some human interaction where it goes into a default account? And that's I think where the big problem comes in. And I think it serves a purpose for transactional purposes. I just think really, and that's what I'm trying to get out of this is how well do you have to define it to really make it useful?
Well, this is a challenge in the law, right? I mean, does anybody here bought insurance and then had a casualty and not getting paid on insurance, expecting to get payments? It happens all the time, right? So it's a similar problem with the coding. You go out there and you try to buy insurance to protect yourself against some risk or counterparty risk or whatever, and then it's not covered under the policy. There was an error in your calculation.
The question is more than that. It's unfortunate. You that physical asset to issue the ledger, public ledger, and it they always have this risk of forfeit. So basically, where no one is behind, they can make a decision before. And if Bitcoin forks, you get two Bitcoins. That's a problem. You have physical assets like house, real estate, and cars. That actually doesn't become a problem.
Yeah, but Bitcoin's a fiat currency.
Yeah,
It's really not but it's not a physical thing. It's Ethereum where you say, okay, we've got a problem where we wrote a contract poorly. So what do? You either say, let's try and figure out a way going forward, or we just sort of say, right now, let's just choose a different path and rewrite the contract.
But that's two different things.
Right, I know, I'm just saying, but Bitcoin is not something that you can hard fork because it's one thing. It's a made up currency.
Well, shift the focus for a second, because now we're talking about private transactions dealing with each other. Okay,
Right.
So when you have private parties dealing with each other and you have complicated scenarios, there's always going to be a role that lawyers are going to raise their hand and say, but there could be a problem, and we need to have a dispute resolution mechanism. Friction needs to exist to resolve the problem fairly. But what happens when the government says, we're going to start putting the driver's licenses that you have on a blockchain?
I think there's society taboo about it too. We hear so much about Bitcoin getting hacked, blockchain getting hacked, that it's hard for society to be willing to trust putting their assets and maybe even medical information in the blockchain.
But the blockchain, so the operating system level, hasn't been hacked. The application at the next level, where people start exchanging things back and forth, you want Bitcoin, you want to get dollars for it. So now there's an exchange that allows that to happen. That's been hacked. Okay, because now people are starting to put data into the middle. But the underlying blockchain itself for the past 7 years hasn't been hacked. And people seem to think that that is the trustworthy system. And what is going on now, so take a look at a website that's Sovereign, S-O-V-R-I-N, sovereign.org. And we'll get that to you. We had to fill in at the last minute here on this one, so we don't have slides. But sovereign.org, and then the other one is Evernym, E-V-E-R-N-Y-M, evernym.com. These are companies that are building digital identity platforms for the blockchain, self-sovereign identity platforms. And you will see that some of the first use applications are the Internal Revenue Service, Illinois driver's licenses. You're seeing government entities you're beginning to say, wait a second, we just want to start putting that information, your driver's license, into a blockchain. And then it's, of course, up to each one of us to then be able to learn how to use that information in order to be able to show that we have a driver's license. You can still have a physical driver's license if you want to, but if somebody wanted to know, you could have, for example, information on your smartphone that references the hashtag that would be in the blockchain that you have a driver's license with your age, so that when you walk into a bar, you would just have them click on that. You would have to show them your driver's license, which tells somebody that you don't know where you live, what color your eyes are, and all the other information that appears on your license. All they needed to know is that you're over the drinking age when you go in. So, and then in the case of the IRS, it helps the IRS prevent fraudulent transactions. I'm going to apply for a refund for filing my taxes, but there's somebody else trying to file using my social security number, and they figure out a way to defraud the government, defraud me. Now I have to track that all down with the blockchain and an identity that is tied to your just the tax aspects of your life. So it's that identity piece is not your entire identity all at once on your resume. It's a little piece here, it's a little piece there, it's a little bit of your financial information, it's a little bit of where you went to school, it's a little bit of what your health records are, but it's all distributed in different ledgers everywhere that are part of a web of trust that society has built with each other. And what's happening right now is that individual groups are becoming the first to use it. This is not a system where we've got broad scale adoption of anything yet. This is the earliest days of it. Bitcoin is a speculator's game. It started out on the dark web. It started out with, a lot of drug transactions, and it proved its point. You can move money anonymously, and it's very difficult for regulators to come in and figure out who's doing what. It took them a while, but it took them a while because people that were involved, everybody lives somewhere, moves around. But if you wanted to, and you wanted to completely eliminate, the government from your life, you would find a country that is very friendly to people that are playing in virtual currency. You'd leave this country, you'd go to that country, get citizenship there, and you would basically do all your transactions in the blockchain, and there would be no regulators after you. The reason that you have problems that are beginning to develop here in the States is because the regulators have finally figured out we need to deal with this. On the positive level, you are finding regulators that are like the IRS, or in some cases the Department of Homeland Security, the IRS. So they want to track certain types of transactions. So in the case of the IRS, they don't want to be defrauded giving money out to somebody else, and they don't want us to be defrauded by losing our money. So they realize that the identity system they have is broken, just doesn't work. This year, Medicare is going to be issuing new numbers. Well, eventually those will be hacked, okay? But if they're on a blockchain, it's going to be very difficult to hack them, and you can see it moving in that direction fairly fast. And then as some of the consortiums, the financial consortiums, begin to interact with each other on the blockchain and create a set of relationships with each other, you would then be able to interact more efficiently with that group. And they may require a new form of identity as you come into that system, and an identity on the blockchain, which is something that we'll talk about in the next segment. So it's really just the beginning. Now, let's take an example. I was talking to a law firm in Lagos, Nigeria yesterday. And a place like continent of Africa or South America is an ideal location for this kind of technology to take off. You have, and the reason for that is because all of these countries, for the most part, have soft currencies, or essentially difficult currency systems. It's hard to exchange money that you own in these places, and there's huge diasporas that a lot of them are right here in Houston, and they earn money here, and they try to send the money back to their home country, to relatives that they have there. And there are huge financial intermediary costs in doing that. When you get right down to it, you ask the question, why? All you're doing is moving bits and moving money, and why should the bank get a 10 or a 20% cut for doing that? In addition to that, if it ends up in paper, hard currency, you run the risk of theft on the other side, because people are walking into a Western Union office, and when they come out, they're coming out with cash. So you have some serious problems at the sort of basic level, but then sometimes people want to transfer large sums of money to buy a house or to buy a car or something of that nature. And so what has happened is that those countries with their diaspora have already set up parallel systems. They've already figured this out. They don't want to deal with the banks. So they deal with a trusted intermediary, but there's always a trust aspect, right? Somebody's going to get the Nigerian money and somebody's going to get the dollars. But who's going to give it first? And do you trust the person who's going to swap it that's in the middle? That is, and it's that trust that you have where you've disintermediated Western Union, but now you have somebody else who's trusted there. On a blockchain, you literally just, the money goes up, and when both are there, it just gets swapped automatically. So those are the simple kinds of transactions that happen first when you're in this adoption cycle. But as you get into this adoption cycle, you're going to, I think, see more happening between the developed world and the diaspora as a big growth pattern in that kind of a setting than you'll see in other areas first, until you start getting government people like, as I said, the IRS issuing identity and Homeland Security and so forth. Driver's licenses. Driver's licenses will be the big one. Because everybody who wants to drive is going to have a driver's license. And Illinois is the first state that is going pretty big on this. But the minute you have one state where it functions well, then that barrier will drop in many states fast. And then everybody's going to have a driver's license on the blockchain. When that happens, now people know. Now people are going to understand what this means to me and how it works. And they're going to start asking questions. Well, how else does it work? What else can I use it for? We're still a year, 2, 3 away from that, but
what does that mean for people that are getting pulled over? Do they show their phone and just say, I have a license in Indiana?
Well, I mean, they would still, if they want to have, you still have your diploma, you still have your physical license, you still can show.
Now, what if you're in New York and you
then,
just say, I don't have my license, but it's on a blockchain?
Then they would, you give them the hashtag on the blockchain that they can verify in the cloud in a second. And,
I'm just wondering about the functional aspects of it. I'm sorry.
Depends on how the smart contracts.
Okay. I don't know. I'm just wondering how. Yeah, I'm just wondering how it functionally will work. Okay.
They don't catch up. So a good point. Even insurance. Years ago, you couldn't show your insurance on the phone. Police would accept it. You actually have to have a physical insurance card, which didn't make any sense because the card, your physical paper insurance has the same information you show them on your phone. So as time goes on, the law will catch up. There's going to be kinks. And to what he's saying, I'm not here.
Look, I'm not a Luddite. I'm just wondering how functionally it works.
You're asking good questions. Some people might not understand or know what exactly entails.
Because certainly there's a certain amount of fraud that can happen. Someone just says, has a PDF of someone else's license or mock-up of a license. They say, oh, look, I have a license.
Correct. Now to the other point, why it's so exciting, it's an exciting space. Blockchain, not necessarily the currency side. So the speculation side is,
I'm not a big fan of the currency side.
Yeah,
I like the transactional side, and I like this. I'm just asking the questions.
Starting with Bitcoin, it's never been hacked. So just to simplify it, it's basically thousands of they call it decentralized because now instead of it just being one computer, if I wanted to hack Bank of America, I just need to find good hackers who are going to hack Bank of America data center, and you're in. But with blockchain, you have thousands, and the more it grows, if I wanted to hack the system, I'm going to have to hack each each and every one of these
You need 51% of the computers,
which
which China could do it.
is almost impossible. Okay, so tied to what he said, the application is what's really exciting. I'm Nigerian. I know exactly what it is. I was born in Lagos, Nigeria, and to send this money back home, it's really expensive. Not only is it really expensive, you have to deal with the theft side. Not even the theft side. The government itself is so corrupt that they're manipulating the currency. So for $1, it's almost 400, 500 naira. When in the 60s, it used to be 50, the currency used to be much better than the dollar. So when you're dealing with all these things, in Kenya, they have M-Pesa. There's a way this is before blockchain, they figured out, oh, the communication, the mobile system market is exploding. So they started exchanging currency using their cell phones in partnership with telephone companies. So these are all applications that are going to change the world. You know, people are excited about the currency side. Not saying you're it's crazy about, but people are more excited about making money. But that's going to be the icing on the cake when this whole thing, takes place.
I absolutely agree. I absolutely agree, and I believe it's a better way of doing it.
Correct.
You know, Pakistan had the Hawala system for centuries.
Correct.
You know,
Guys
transferring
like you,
money.
the questions you ask are important.
I'm just asking functionally, how does it work?
So functionally, there are, what you really are dealing with, let me just get this point on, and we'll take a couple more questions. These systems tend to function because tokens move around on them. And that at least around here, you've got the internet coin offering growth. So a lot of companies are raising money by issuing tokens. And that's to take advantage of this cryptocurrency. Right. So all these cryptocurrencies are coming out. So Bitcoin is one, but now you have a lot of different currencies that are coming out. And no different than the IPOs of 2000, 2001, 2002. Probably about 80 to 90% of them are going to fail. Because, all of a sudden there's just been this tremendous growth. People are parting with their money. And what is actually going to work in those settings. So you sort of have three different types of currencies that are associated with this blockchain. One is just the cash, like the Bitcoin itself, and its major function is to be an exchange mechanism and a storehouse of some value that's tied to a simple transaction. Then there are the platforms. We talked about one of them, Ethereum. And in those settings, you've attached a smart contract to the token itself, and it operates within an industry platform. For a while, they were calling something platform as a service. And you could see a real estate industry creating a platform for buying and selling houses. You could see an oil and gas industry creating a platform for certain of its transactions. And it might be that the platform starts at a very pain point level that nobody's quite figured out how to systematize well. And so it only solves one tiny bit of the problem, but everything else is the old way. You're just taking that one problem and you're just putting a platform there to solve an aspect of that problem. And again, please think of this in terms of adoption. How's it going to be adopted? Look for the biggest pain points where nobody in the friction world has figured out how to solve it. You got lawyers involved, you got accountants involved, you got people, back and forth within the industry fighting over something. Whatever it is, and all of a sudden you realize, but there's really just a simple way to solve this. If we just put some logic here and then the logic solves it. So you have a token that will move back and forth once the conditions of that platform issue are resolved. And then the last one is a utility platform. And this is where a lot of folks are just saw Bloom. Bloom is trying to replace the credit industry. So Equifax is going to be replaced. There's a utility of identifying your credit, being able to manage your credit. So you have identity in that system. So there's a utility to have your credit resolved in that setting. A more interesting one to me would be an energy token. Think of the problem that just happened in Puerto Rico. The entire plant of electrical, all the equipment, everything is gone. So you no longer have stakeholders providing the electricity the old way. And what do you have in Puerto Rico? You have a lot of sun and you have a lot of wind, and you have a massive demand for electricity. And literally, there are people at MIT and other places that are figuring out, well, how would you store energy that's created in the sun and distribute it, right? So it's the gathering, the storage, and the distribution. And you could put tokens into effect that would move from the entire chain, from the person or the company that's using the electricity, all the way back to the people who are creating it. And you could literally write contracts into those tokens to adjust the use of those tokens, the credits of those tokens, the way that's the fairest, right? Because a lot of times people think that there is unfair usage of electricity by different groups. And the old system allows that because all you have to do is pay for it, buy it, pay for it, you can use it. But if you put all of the gathering and storage and use into a token-based system, you can write all the terms of those, the entire terms of that utility into how the tokens move back and forth with each other and change the entire system. So there are groups now trying to create those kinds of utilities for a place like Puerto Rico. Another example of utility would be using Dropbox to store your documents. And instead of paying for it with your cash, you would pay for it with tokens. And the way those things get started is that I'll get contacted by somebody who's starting this new platform, and they'll say, give us access to your contact list on Google, and we'll give you some tokens, okay? And so now it's up to me to give them access to my contact list, and then I get some tokens. So I'm farming, so to speak. The Bitcoin farming was all about being the first set of computers to validate the blockchain. So there are different ways to create those kinds of farming mechanisms. And I think that in terms of the cryptocurrency traders, they think pretty lowly of the utility tokens right now. They think those are going to be the toughest ones to make any money at. So those are the slowest ones to rise up. But there might be some, like I think something like the electricity in Puerto Rico might work, because you have a whole situation that you could build an entire economy around. Whereas, because there's demand for electricity all the time. People need it. Whereas the use of Dropbox, you got to create a demand for it. So that might be a bit different. We're going to move into some of the regulation of this in a bit. We wanted to stop and see if there are any questions. Frank, first.
At the same time that we're maximizing the use and convenience of the technology, that we also impose a barrier for others. We maximize the use and the convenience of the technology for some, but we also impose a barrier for people who don't have access to that.
Well, in the next segment, we'll take a little break so we can deal with the hackathon discussion in between the two sessions. We have a project called Identity for All, and the identity mechanism actually is going to be built on top of phones, and teaching people how to use their identity on phones. So they'll learn the first aspect of the blockchain on their phones, and as was pointed out in Kenya, where you have M-Pesa, which is a virtual currency, and the same thing in Brazil, which I've been to quite a few times, and they use virtual currency there as well. Those are populations that are much more ready than we are to move to this space. I absolutely predict this for sure. They will skip all of the regulation, all of the problems we face with law and the friction that we run into, because they don't have justice systems that have been built up through the 20th century to battle all this stuff. And they're going to go right to a new technology that's frictionless. And in some cases, because they have soft currencies, they don't have currencies they can really count on, their first use of that technology is going to be for money, to be able to pay for services and products, and they're going to figure out how to use it fast. When you land in Kenya, in Nairobi, where we ran one of our music projects, you get off the plane, you go get a SIM card, which is filled with money in the back of your chip. And when you go out to furthest places to buy arts and crafts from somebody in a village, they take their phone and you pay them phone to phone. They're not looking for any currency in hand. It's on their phone. So they already have this cultural mindset, and it's simple phones. It's not. They're even getting some of the smartphones now, but when I was there last, it was all the the simple phones. But it is absolutely true that you have to address access from the point of view of making sure that everybody has access, or you don't really have a fair system. So you're going to shift away from banks and more to telecoms. When I was in Afghanistan in 2009, 2010, 97% of the people there and the work that we were doing were not banked, but everybody had a cell phone. So that's where that money is going to play. The regulation was the piece of this we wanted to talk a little bit about next.
Sure.
The internet coin offerings being the first place that seems to be where there's a problem.
Yeah, I mean, I don't do a ton of securities work, but I mean, I think, I don't know if any of you probably watched the John Oliver talk on Bitcoin. He brought up the point that he brought up this example that some groups are actually advertising, essentially running up the prices of coins and then selling them when they're high and crashing the price. That doesn't happen as much in the stock market because the stock market's regulated. If it wasn't regulated, it would probably happen all the time. And so, that's an issue from people who are advocates of Bitcoin too, that regulation is going to have to play a role in regulating the transactions that go on. So things like that don't happen. And so as long as there's bad actors out there interested and willing to make a quick buck off of destroying a particular coin or token, you can see groups like the SEC, the CFTC coming in and regulating the markets to prevent things like that. And you were mentioning before that the SEC.
The SEC just announced that they want you to treat internet coin offerings like you're treating internet IPOs, just as securities. Now that's interesting in this respect because that means that the tokens that you're holding are being considered the issuance of securities for SEC purposes. But if you're lucky enough to be able to buy and sell them and make money on them, the IRS is treating them as property, and you have to report them as gains. So depending upon which group is regulating you, they're being treated differently for.
They haven't allowed them to be classified as Reg D securities, right? They're just pure IPOs.
They're saying that you either have to register. They're saying at this point either you have to register or qualify as an exemption.
Right, that's what I mean. Reg D 506C.
Which means that only people who are accredited investors can invest in the
right, but they're not really tradable at that point.
And then they're not really tradable at that point.
Regarding the token, coins, it's not clear that which one is commodity. There are those FIFO tokens, not FIFO tokens, FIFO coins, Dash, or Sterling, or start a new coin, and not a new token. Now I'm not talking about like ERC 20 token, and that's more no one knows.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to, it's because, I mean, security is essentially an ownership of a company, right? Coin is not a company, it's just a thing. And so to me, it sounds like it's more.
But because it's a thing,
commodity.
it's you want to, generally speaking, people don't want to sit there with Bitcoins or other tokens. They want to be able to use them for something. And if you're able to use them to pay for your tuition at school, well, that's one thing. And then you're going to have broad scale adoption. We're far from there, but it's happening. Companies like Overstock.com accept Bitcoins for their purchases. So, you know, if you have more overstocks, if all of a sudden Walmart says we're accepting Bitcoins, there's going to be a sea change and it'll happen fast. Don't know when that's going to happen, but somewhere along the way, it's going to happen because as the value of those currencies continue to grow, stability starts setting in, then you'll have that taking place. But in the meantime, even though this cloud-based system is global, which means that it functions in an international setting, and that's going to be really the point of the identity for all talk. You're going to be in a situation where we're all physically located in some place. And you're going to have companies that are going to set up ATMs and exchange mechanisms and other ways where you can exchange that Bitcoin or that token for fiat currency, for dollars or something else. And the minute you're in that money exchange business, you're probably going to get licensed. You're going to need licenses at the state level. And now the bar associations are taking national positions that these need to be licensed. And it only makes sense because even though they're not banks, they're in the money exchange business. And if you start putting your data into those machines, now there's a central place where everybody's participating either in those networks or using those machines. All their information is there. It's eminently hackable at that point, you know, unless they have, you know, the right kinds of protections around it. But that's, if it gets hacked there or it gets stolen there, what protections do you have? There are no protections. It's completely unregulated space until about now. New York is one of the leaders in that area of regulation, but it will begin to expand quite a bit. But one of the ways, and the organization that is putting this on is called Legal Hackers. Legal Hackers is a group of groups. They are based internationally. They are techies and lawyers that happen to be wanting to adopt different types of technology and create ways in which they can work together to increase access to justice for all and you know, essentially make technology work for justice systems. Justice systems, as you may have heard, really only reach about 20 to 25% of the population in the United States. And that's when you define justice system as access to courts and governmental institutions. So that's a pretty low barrier, low level of justice. A lot of people look at justice the way Thomas Jefferson defined it: pursuit of happiness, you know, empowerment, the opportunity to, you know, imagine and do things and be able to interact with people. And that's pretty, if you start defining justice that way, then the percentages of access to justice go even lower than 20 to 25%. So Legal Hackers, they're, I think, Christy, is it 50 groups around the world? Do you know? 50 nodes, they call them nodes, all over the world. And today, this is the Houston node. So we are part of 50 groups that are interacting. Some are small, some are larger. There's a group in New York that's fairly active. And the idea here in Houston is to get this group, especially here at a place like Station Houston, which is, you know, promoting how technology business can grow from here. So if a group like this begins to take leadership in how tokens are developed, how businesses are developed in this space, it's an early place to be playing. And it's a good place to be playing. As I said at the beginning, for those of you who are here, I'm from Boston, so, you know, I went to law school in Boston. Across the river is MIT at Cambridge. You've got Kendall Square. You have a very strong entrepreneurial and venture capital and technology environment. Houston doesn't want to compete with that. Okay, Houston doesn't want to compete with Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley has Stanford. It has a venture capital mentality that is second to none in the world. Houston has its own assets. Houston has a diaspora, and the diaspora is probably second to none, including New York, in the United States. And it's through those types of interactions that you can really make technology create access to relationships and opportunities where you're going cross-border. that is a special and unique asset that I see in Houston that nobody else has. Wall Street, what are they doing? They're spending their time in this space, really focusing on fintech. So fintech is really where the banks and the financial institutions are figuring out how to do their deals, as I was saying before, like a platform as a service, where they're trying to figure out ways to move money around from investors to traders to companies and back and forth very efficiently. So you'll see a lot of those types of systems. You won't have a physical stock certificate pretty soon. It'll all be in the cloud. And all your transactions will take place in the cloud. It'll all be money-based transactions. So Wall Street is focusing on what it does. It's Wall Street, so they're using fintech for that. So I think here in Houston, the Legal Hackers Group really has an opportunity to take advantage of the diaspora and really build on the one aspect of the blockchain that is unique to every other business. It's global. And every justice system in the world is local. It all is based on nation states. It's all based on where you are based. And then when you're dealing internationally, you have to choose laws. You have to choose forums where you're going to resolve disputes. It gets very challenging in those kinds of settings. And yet, global is where we're at. And global is where the world is headed. And Houston can certainly lead in that area. The organization that Christy and myself run is the Internet Bar. So we're a bar association on the internet, helping to set standards in those spaces, creating projects to do that type of work. One of the things that's happening today is a hackathon. And I don't know, I hope, did some of you come here to participate in the hackathon? Well, we hope some do. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what the hackathon is.
Well, we'll take one last question before we next it.
I have a question. Are we going to talk about different models like proof of stake versus proof of work?
Well, maybe I understand it in different terms. So tell me what you're looking for.
So there's different. So the idea is, the question is who's going to pay for the infrastructure? How do you encourage people to propagate or mine your currency? When they're using coins, it's proof of work, in that the more coins someone mines, and they propagate that throughout the network, they receive a fraction of value on that coin in return for the work and effort they put in. Whereas a proof of stock or a proof of stake is the more you contribute to this network, the longer you hold the coin and distribute it, you become a stronger member in that community, which gives you a bigger voice in that community. Maybe you become an administrator of something. But the idea is, like, when you have this distributed network that is sharing your blocks, how do you encourage people to host it? Either you have to, the government can do it because they could get money through taxation or whatnot, but someone has to cover the cost, or they have to receive value for hosting your chains.
Well, I'll give you, we have an example that we're driving ourselves at Internet Bar that addresses some of that. First of all, the underlying operating systems that I was talking about at the beginning, the blockchain operating systems, which are in some cases being built open source, and in some cases being built with standards, are all a product of people in the world are jumping in and contributing their time to build it. It's very much like Linux at this beginning level. Now you're talking about the next layer up. Now you're talking about at the application level. There are lots of different things that are beginning to happen around the world. So in the case of some of the for-profit companies, they're trying to get you to, they're setting the terms by which you farm and get the tokens.
Right. What's the incentive?
Well, the incentive of holding the tokens is that in the case of a utility, you can use the service that's on the network. Maybe you can have a Dropbox forever for free. That's a utility that you want to use. In the case of Puerto Rico, maybe, maybe the person who's spending the time to help organize the energy grids, maybe the person who is contributing some of the batteries that are going to store the electricity that's created on the wind. Maybe in advance of that all being set up, you identify the terms and conditions of who gets what tokens, and you allocate tokens to that person or to that company that's contributing that type of thing. So it's not a capitalist system. It's an incentive-based system that's based on the terms that are very clearly defined about what that community is going to operate. What we did was we went to, we made a presentation called Digital Identity for Stateless Refugees. This is what I'm going to be talking about a little bit later. But in a refugee camp, just to answer your question, you have a refugee camp. We were just in one in Bangladesh 6 weeks ago. 650,000 Rohingya Muslims in this camp. They are 3 months away from monsoons, and that's going to be a really terrible situation that is going to happen there. Even assuming they plan and take care of, keeping as many people protected as they can during that monsoon season, even after that happens, what are the conditions for that group of refugees? The predictions at the UN level are that they're going to live 5 to 7 years, if that many, in that camp.